Hi everyone, it's Christina from the DIYmommy.com, and today I want to show you how to sew a DIY duvet cover. This project is part of the one-room challenge that I'm working on for my daughter's bedroom makeover. If you want to learn more about that, make sure to check out the links in the description box below. This is a really simple way to sew a duvet cover. I've tried to use a lot of shortcuts here so that this is nice and easy. This is for a twin duvet cover, which is a lot easier than any other size because you can usually get away with one width of fabric. If you're making a duvet cover for a larger bed, make sure to check out all the measurements in the description box below. You might have to sew some fabric together. So I'm starting with some really soft minky fabric because my daughter really wanted soft fabrics in this room. So I'm using that for the base of the duvet cover, and then on top I'm using some really adorable unicorn printed knit fabric from spoonflower.com. I'm laying them right sides together. They're both about 58 inches wide, so just about enough width to cover a twin sized duvet. This is a duvet that I found from IKEA. I'm just laying it on top of the fabrics, and then I'm using that as a guide to cut off the length that I need. So I bought about 2.5 yards of each of the fabrics, and then I'm using a ruler to make sure that I have a nice straight line here on the bottom to cut, and I'm just making sure that I have about the same width on the bottom everywhere, drawing a line with a hard-edged ruler just like this. So I'm making my fabric pieces exactly the same size as the duvet. So when I sew them together using a 1/2 inch seam, the duvet cover is going to be slightly smaller than my duvet. I'd rather have that look than a duvet cover that stretches out and has excess fabric on the sides. Then I'm cutting off a piece of that minky fabric that's about 5 inches long by the same width as the rest. This is going to be for my button placket at the bottom of the duvet. And then I'm just pinning a lot all the way around the duvet, at least every 5 inches or so around the sides and the top. Next, I'm sewing the two large pieces of fabric together. I'm using about a 1/2 inch seam allowance and a long stitch length. So here's how my pieces look when they're stitched together. I didn't use any sort of seam finishing on this fabric because both of them are non-fray, but if you have a frayable fabric like a woven cotton, make sure to seam finish with a serger or a zigzag, and then you want to make sure you leave about 5 inches at the end of each side of this duvet so that you can do this button placket. Next, I'm taking that strip that I cut for the button placket at the bottom of the duvet, and I'm folding it over on one side 1/2 inch and ironing it, and then I'm folding it another 1.5 inches and ironing that, and then I'm pinning that all in place. Next, I'm doing the same thing for the minky or the bottom side of the duvet. So I'm folding this raw edge under 1/2 inch and then folding it under 1.5 inches again, ironing and pinning it in place. So you want to use a ruler or some sort of hard edge to make sure that your hem is nice and straight. When you're working with minky especially, it's important to pin your hem in place because it's very slippery and slidey and you don't want your hem to slide around before you sew it. Next, I'm going to sew those hems down. So I'm sewing quite close to the folded edge, about 1/4 inch with my sewing machine. Again, I'm using a long stitch and sewing everything in place, making sure I have the edges turned under as I go along. Here's how the duvet looks at this point. You have your button edge like this, and then I am putting this button placket piece over top of the duvet bottom like this so that the hems are laying on top of each other. You can see I had a little excess fabric of the knit, so I'm just making sure that I have the same amount of hem here. I'm just measuring, it happened to be a 1/2 inch over, and just pinning that all in place. So I'm pinning this button placket all the way along the bottom of my duvet. And then you're going to sew along the side that you haven't sewn yet and all along the bottom edge to attach that button placket to the bottom of your duvet cover. Again, I'm using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Next, I'm taking my duvet cover and I am turning it right side out just like this. Duvet covers I find aren't that hard to sew at all. It's just a whole bunch of really straight seams, but the hard part about the duvet covers is that there's just so much fabric. Next, I'm trimming off all of the excess thread, and I'm also clipping the corners at an angle so that when you turn the duvet cover right side out, you don't have any bulk at the corners. And here's how the duvet cover looks turned right side out with that little button placket part like this. Next, I'm going to measure where my buttons and buttonholes are going to go. So I had 6 buttons. You could probably go for a few more, even 8 or 10 would work for a duvet. And then just taking the width of my duvet, dividing it by the spaces between the buttons, and then measuring out where my buttonholes are going to be. My buttons I'm using are 3/4 of an inch wide, so I am using pins to measure 3/4 of an inch. And that's going to be where I sew my buttonholes. So on my machine, there's a stitch function that sews buttonholes, so I'm going to use that stitch function to sew all of the buttonholes. So mine just has like a small little satin stitch or a little tiny zigzag stitch that goes up and down and side to side to create the buttonhole. So I'm sewing all the buttonholes for all the 6 buttons on my button placket. Next, I'm using the buttonholes that I sewed as a guide and marking with a pin where I need to sew my buttons. So I actually use my machine to sew my buttons. You could do this too, even if you don't have any special sort of attachment. You just use a very wide zigzag stitch, and you can kind of move your button around underneath to where the needle is going to go through, and that's kind of an easy hack to use to sew on buttons instead of hand sewing them. It actually works really well. And that's it. Once your buttons are sewed on, you can cut open the buttonholes that you made, and then you just insert your duvet into your duvet cover, button it up, and it is all done. So there is a duvet rolling hack you can use to put a duvet on a duvet cover, and I'll leave that in the description box below. But here I'm just tucking the corners of my duvet into my duvet cover and then just shaking it out so it's all smooth. I absolutely love how this simple DIY duvet cover turned out. I love this really soft minky bottom. The buttons are cute and they're also functional, and I really love this fabric that I found at Spoonflower for the top of the duvet. It's quite unique and it's going to match little A's room perfectly. It has all the colors that she wants, so the teal and the fuchsia and the gold, and it's very soft. Softness was really important to little A, so I made sure I used soft fabrics for my duvet. You could use soft fabrics like this, or you could use any sort of fabric you want. I also found some pillows at Target, and I really like how they match with this duvet as well. So the room isn't quite done yet. There's still a few more things to do, but it's getting close, and I'm really loving how it looks so far. And I can't wait to show the rest of the room details with you. I'll be doing a few finishing things next week, and then the week after is the big reveal. Thanks so much for watching this video. If you like this tutorial, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel for more DIY and decor ideas, and I'll see you all again in my next video. Bye!